Good interview to watch. This show that I'm watching right now is called Star Talk, with Neil Degrasse Tyson. Um, the doctor that we actually see on the screen here is George Yaconopoulos, I believe his last name is, and another person that's on the show is a comedian by the name of Chuck Nice. They all get into this really good conversation about this COVID-19 and the difference between natural immunity and monoclonal antibody treatment. They just get into this really good conversation. It's good for everybody to listen to what the experts have to say and not always what the media is saying. The media is secondhand information from what the actual scientists have to say about it, and people who are really good at biochemistry and things of that nature, and bioengineering and epidemiology, stuff like that. So I just wanted to share this with you. I saw this video and I was reading about it, and I also looked into it, and it's really interesting. It's very thought provoking. I wanted to share this with you guys and maybe do a little bit of commentary in between, because there may be some differences in here that I have, and there's also some differences that you might have in what's being said, and it's good, I think, too, and also very healthy to have critical thinking. Don't just take what people say for face value, but also weigh it with things you've learned and your own personal experiences and things you've seen other people go through as well. But the professionals on this level, not just the ones you hear in politics, because this pandemic is not political. It is life changing for the human race, and I think that if it gets too political, then that's when things start to get confusing for people. So let's get into this real quick, and then I may stop it a couple of times for some commentary, but I think you'll pretty much get the gist of what they're saying.
Thank you, George. Thank you, George. Thank you, Neil. Sorry about that.
Yeah, listen, that is a sign of true confidence right there when you enter a show and thank yourself.
It's hard for me because, as you guys just heard, I'm a classmate in high school of Niel Degrasse Tyson, so I'm living in the shadow forever. Shadow of forever.
Well, yeah, I don't know what kind of what that shadow looks like, because we come out of high school. You are my valedictorian, right? Of our graduating year. I graduated something like 300th or something. You're valedictorian, and so now you're sort of a billionaire co-founder of Regeneron, and so maybe we do a whole other show on how to become a billionaire. I think that's get good grades, I guess. Is that where it starts? So, George, you are a biomedical scientist, immunology expert. You're an expert. And some of the items on your resume, or in your company's resume, is that you developed the most valuable mice ever. These are mice that have the exact immune system of human beings, so that one can test antiviral treatments on these mice and know it's going to work with humans. I didn't know you could do that. That's a thing you could do? Invent a mouse?
Yeah.
Except for Walt Disney.
Except for Walt Disney, yes.
Yeah, Mickey Mouse might actually be more valuable if you take that into account. But, for movie fans, if you saw I Am Legend or so forth, you remember that Will Smith was in the basement and he was working with these rats, and he was injecting them.
Well, just to catch everybody up, he's a biologist, I guess, an immunologist, and there's a virus that basically turned everybody into zombies who didn't otherwise kill. And he's trying to find the magic serum for this. And he thinks he's, at one point, the last person alive on Earth to do so. So pick it up from there.
Yeah, and he's testing at night while he's fighting the zombies during the day. At night,
I had to stop it right there, because the one thing they didn't say about that movie was he was apologetic. He was apologetic because he was sorry that he actually caused all those people to be infected. That's a key point there, is that when people are doing this research, there's always a chance that that person can become infected and then infect a lot of other people. In that movie, he actually was infected, but he was not. He was immune, so he didn't change like the rest of other people. He was like one out of maybe a million people. But that would actually bond with that virus. But that's the one thing they could have said in this, but I think it probably would have alluded to too much or made people go the other way with the rest of the story. But that was the one thing I noticed. They were trying to break through that glass and get to him, and he was like, "I'm sorry, I'm gonna make this right. I could save you all." Remember that part when you saw that movie? If you didn't see that movie, that was a huge spoiler alert, but that's an old movie. So you should have seen it by now. It's real good. But I remember that part. He felt responsible for everything. He was like the person that created the virus. So it's like, wow. He was actually trying to create something else, and then it wound up getting out of control. If you guys remember that was a great movie. They didn't say that in here. They should have, but I think I know why they didn't. All right, let's see what else there. Let's get into it.
He's in the basement laboratory injecting, rodents with test serums and so forth. Our basic theory was if you had any disease, any epidemic, and the example I used to give was Ebola. And as we know, unfortunately, if most people get Ebola, they're going to die.
Unfortunately.
And rarely, as Will Smith was in the movie, 1 in a million or might survive. And that 1 in a million would then have the magic serum that their body made, which was really antibodies, to keep them alive. And that was Will Smith, the hero in the movie. His was the 1 in a million person who had beaten the virus because of his own antibodies. And what he was trying to do was clone them out of himself. But cloning antibodies out of a human is really hard. So we had the idea. Why is it really hard? Because essentially you have to almost, kill the human to get all the antibodies out of the human. So we had this idea a long time ago now was, well, what if we put the human immune system into a mouse and we gave 1,000 or 10,000 mice Ebola? If 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 10,000 mice survived from Ebola, they would have beaten it with a human antibody. But we could literally harvest all the antibodies out of that one human mouse. We wouldn't have to do these one at a time experiments that Will Smith was doing. We could literally take all the antibodies, harvest them all out of that mouse, and essentially come up with a cure for Ebola, which we actually did. We came up with a cure from Ebola by essentially infecting mice with the equivalent of Ebola. One of the mice survived. We pulled out the fully human antibody that mouse was making because it had a fully human immune system, grew it up in these bioreactors outside the body, purified it, gave it back to humans, and we did a trial with the World Health Organization, the NIH in the Congo during the depths of the epidemic there, and it was a cure for Ebola.
Wow.
And so
That's
why people were so excited in the early days of the pandemic, before there was anything else, about our approach and the antibody approach in particular, that we might be able to come up with antibodies that could attack the virus and kill it and cure people.
Wow.
So is this?
All I can
is
say
this,
to that is, I just want to say two things. One, that is genius, absolute genius. And two, mice hate you.
Oh, wow.
Actually, mice in the wild will just get swallowed by a bird, an owl, or something.
True.
So maybe the
True
mice
that.
in the lab,
True.
they're seeing that as
They lived a good life.
they lived a good life. They're well fed.
They lived
when
a good
wanna
life.
be. Right.
Right.
You guys want to hear something totally crazy? Okay. Many humans are allergic to cats, right? You all know that.
Yeah.
So why are they allergic to cats? Because cats make an allergen, something that we're all allergic to. So we actually took a couple thousand mice and attacked them and made them allergic to cats. And we got a couple mice that actually were now resistant. They had beaten the cat allergen. Essentially, they had cured themselves of cat allergy, and we've now purified and given it to humans, and actually works against cat allergy in humans. So think about it. We first made mice allergic to cats, and then we used the mice to come up with the cure for cat allergy. So somehow, I don't know, that's somehow related to the war between the animals and the mice and cats, Tom and Jerry.
You
Tom and
actually
Jerry.
negotiated the first peace treaty between Tom and Jerry.
That's crazy.
So this fact that we get 1 in 1,000 or 1 in a million, that goes beyond clinical trials. You can't test a million people typically in a clinical trial. But we know, am I correct, that there were some people who were found to have a natural immunity to the HIV virus? The HIV, is that correct?
Yes, that is true.
So were those
There's a
people
couple-
collected and do a sort of an I Am Legend scenario with them?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting point. So with HIV, there's two ways that rare people can actually become resistant. And one way is because their bodies are genetically missing the receptor for HIV. So HIV, in order to enter cells, has to bind to something on human cells. And some human beings are missing that receptor. And these are people who are rarely resistant. They don't get any infection at all. Other people got infected, but their bodies very rarely made what they call a broadly neutralizing antibody that was effective. And both of those approaches are being used going forward and have already, in some cases, helped people. They actually took the stem cells out of a human being, because the stem cells, they're what they call the blood stem cells or the hematopoietic stem cells. They make your blood cells, including your T cells. We all know that HIV attacks your T cells.
Yeah.
So what they did was they took a poor patient who was suffering from HIV because the HIV was killing their T cells, and they took out their stem cells. They knocked out the HIV receptor, and then they gave them the stem cells back.
Whoa.
And now this person's own stem cells were now engineered, genetically engineered, to be resistant to HIV because they no longer had the receptor, and they repopulated themselves and they were cured of HIV. Now that's a very hard treatment to do to thousands or hundreds of thousands of people, because that's a genetic manipulation and a stem cell transplant, but it actually works. So you're absolutely right. Just like I Am Legend, there are the rare HIV people who are immune via these two different approaches. One is antibodies, which is related to what we're doing for COVID, and the other is, missing the receptor. And they've taken both approaches and they're trying to use them to help in the HIV situation.
But if I don't have a receptor, it doesn't mean I'm warding off HIV. It means I'm not affected by it. But does that mean I can still carry it?
No, well, the beauty is the way we all get infected is just a few viruses enter into our body. And if the virus sticks to our cells, enters into them through the receptor, and then replicates, makes many, many copies of itself, that's how it continues to survive in our body. If it has nothing to stick to, it floats around for a little while and then it just dies. So the people who don't have the HIV receptor are not only resistant for themselves, but the virus just naturally, the few viruses that will get into you die out and you don't make any more. The way you infect somebody else, the way viruses work is they use us as a host to make many copies of themselves and then spread themselves out, often through our secretions, through our cough, and so forth. So if you're not making much virus, you're not going to spread it. So those people are resistant to the virus and they will never spread it.
So this is what they talk about when they talk about viral load, when it comes to the spread of COVID, and there are people who have more viral load at a certain time, and so they're more prone to give the disease to somebody else.
Exactly right. So what happens is we all catch it from, an aerosolized particle, a little droplet of moisture in the air that somebody has coughed up, for example, or by touching a surface that somebody recently might have rubbed their eyeball and touched, and now you touched it. So a tiny particle of moisture that has a few viruses in it, we then touch, and we touch one of our own mucous membrane. That one or a few viruses enter into us. That will not do us any harm normally, except that if one of those viruses sticks to a receptor inside of our body, it invades that cell.
That's
it
all
takes
she wrote.
over the cell.
That's all she wrote.
Makes millions of copies. Those millions of viruses then flow out away from that first cell, and they now affect a million cells. And soon enough, a million times a million becomes a billion. And all of a sudden, you are way out of control.
Wow.
And
Actually, a million times a million is a trillion.
I know.
Just to be clear.
10 to the 12th, whatever 10 to the 12th is.
It's an astronomically large number. So tell me the difference between, I think I know this, but I want to hear it out of the horse's mouth. Sorry to call you a horse in this example, but the the other companies made vaccines against COVID, and you made what we call monoclonal antibodies against COVID. So, as I understand it correctly, your treatment is if you got COVID, you take your treatment and that helps you fight it and might even prevent you from having a hospital visit. So, you're not preventing COVID in the first place, you're attacking it after it has manifested. Do I understand that correctly?
Well, yes, you do, but there's other ways to use antibodies. So let's step back for a second. So this is why we need all these weapons, because they do different things, like you just said. So let's step back for a second. Let's get back to this concept of viral load. A few virus particles attack your body, and they soon take over one cell and then a million cells, and now there's an astronomical amount of virus in your body. What happens? Okay. In the case of Ebola, unfortunately, the body can't react fast enough, okay, because the Ebola replicates so fast and so destroys so many cells that, unfortunately, invariably, as we know, almost all people with Ebola will die. Okay.
Wow.
Luckily, in the case of COVID, it's not as lethal, which means the virus is replicating more slowly. So you get to these astronomical levels more slowly, and allows, in most cases, the body to respond. What does that mean? The body responds by making antibodies. And unlike the Will Smith movie, I Am Legend, where 1 in a million people made the response, or unlike HIV, where only 1 in a million make the right response, to COVID, most humans do make that response. Okay, and that's why most people do well. And what is that response? Most people make their own antibodies that will cover. They're antibodies specific to sticking to the virus. They stick to the surface of the virus, neutralize it, keep it from sticking to anything else itself, and the body just naturally clears it, and you're cured. So most people, the virus comes on, achieves high levels, but it does it relatively slowly over the course of a week or so. The body responds by making antibodies that coat the virus, neutralize the virus, and resolve the infection. And that's why, unlike Ebola or unlike, the zombie virus that Will Smith was trying to beat, most humans beat it.
And so you said,
Okay, I had to say something about that one. That was very, very powerful information. That's a lot that we need to know. And that's why I wanted to share this video. But you see how he was honest about how this works, and basically said that everybody will do well. Well, not everybody, but most people, most healthy people will do well. And this is why I like to watch these kind of things off of the mainstream media, because they give you not just what they give you in the media, they give you all of the information. And I remember in the beginning of this pandemic how they talked about how some people would be asymptomatic and other people will, have a higher viral load. Well, this is what he was saying. Most people will do well. And that's the one thing they're not telling you on television, is that most people will do well. They're telling you that they're giving you the information as though everybody is in danger. And to me, the mainstream media tends to be a little over sensationalized. And I understand they have, to some degree, they have to do that because some people don't listen and they won't get the protection that they need in order to protect other people. So I get that aspect of it. But at the same time, you don't want to scare people to the point where they don't trust their own bodies and what their body is capable of doing. So that's what I appreciate about what he had to say, is that most people will clear this. And most people will do, and this is coming from someone really high ranking in this field of expertise. This guy's the CEO of Regeneron. He ain't that powerful because he's weak. He's that way because he knows exactly what he's talking about. And like I said, I like to absorb this information, but still take some things with a grain of salt, because there are some people who won't do well, but most people probably will. If you look at the hospital rates and then you look at the infection rates, and you'll see that those numbers, the numbers of people who actually pass away of it, is so incredibly minimal. And a lot of these people have pre-existing conditions. So yeah, I'm glad he went ahead and said that, because people need to understand your body is built to deal with a lot of challenges and can overcome them. You can't just give up and say, I really need to have medicine all the time. Sometimes your body can take care of things. And then when you feel like you really need it and can't fight it yourself, that's when you go for the help. But that shouldn't be the first thing you run to. But in the media, they sell it a whole nother way. They tell you that you need help before you actually really do. I like that he put things into perspective. Let's get back into it.
So it's a race basically between your ability to respond to it and its ability to multiply.
That's exactly right. And unfortunately, some people, and we know the people who have risk factors, if you're older, your immune response is not as fast. Just like, we don't run as fast as we did when we were, in high school. Okay. If you've got certain diseases, if you're diabetic, if you're immunocompromised, the definition of immunocompromised is you can't make antibodies. So it's a race. Some people are just slower, and the slower you are, the more dangerous the virus becomes for you, because it races to higher numbers before you control it. So you're exactly right. It's a race between your antibody immune system and the virus to who takes over. So what does a vaccine do? This is why vaccines are so important. They prepare you. They are like a fake infection. The only thing that the vaccine is doing is it fools your body to think that you actually have a viral infection, but all you're making through these mRNA vaccines is you make the so-called spike protein. The body reacts to the spike protein by making antibodies against it, which are neutralizing to the spike, which is neutralizing to the virus. So the vaccine fools your body into making in advance, before you need them, the very antibodies that it would normally make to defeat the virus. But now you're prepared. It's like you've already beaten the virus. So the vaccine will protect the vast majority of people who get it, because now you've made the antibodies that we know can beat many viruses, including this virus. That's why vaccines are so important.
And this accounts for the ranking of who got the vaccine first, because when we only had limited supplies, you gave it to the people who are most at risk, because they would need the best help. Otherwise, the virus takes them out, and they've got no chance.
So basically, you have this thing that happens to you, and the vaccine is not necessarily fighting the thing. It's kind of like an emergency fund that when you save money for an emergency fund, if you lose your job, you're prepared for the loss of your job. You got this money in the bank, and so now you can actually ride this thing out because you're prepared for it. And so that's
antibodies
what the vaccine is really doing. That's antibodies in the bank.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yes. And it's really like soldiers in the bank.
Soldiers in the bank.
This virus is ready to invade, the fortress. Okay. And the doors are open, if there's no soldiers who are going to shoot, the virus that's trying to invade, the virus is going to come in, and the battle is going to be in the fortress. If you man the walls of the fortress with soldiers who are shooting the virus before it comes in, you're prepared. So essentially, it's preparing you to ward off the virus so it will never enter into your body.
Okay, I'm going to pause it there. Now, they're talking about how the vaccines act as soldiers in case something tries to invade and it's there. That's where I differ from what he just said. And the reason why I differ, I have a different opinion of that, is because you have in your body just the way your PC is made. You have a firewall, then you have your antivirus. Your antivirus, to me, would be the vaccine. You allowed your firewall to be penetrated in order to boost, in order to make your antivirus strong. You allowed yourself to be infected with viral material to strengthen the antivirus program that you have on the inside. The firewall to me would be like your defense system. Some people have a strong enough defense system where they don't need an immune system. They can because things just don't get in. And how they explained earlier how some people have missing receptors, and that's why they do better with the virus, because the virus attaches itself, as the gentleman was saying, it attaches itself to receptors, and then it replicates itself. But if you have missing receptors, which asymptomatic people have, then the virus cannot attach itself on and replicate. It'll just die somewhere in the body, but it won't be able to reproduce without those receptors. That was what I gathered from what he was saying. So basically, if you have a very good firewall, which would be no receptors for those things to attach to, then you'll be asymptomatic. And I think that's what they called in the earlier days of this pandemic is people who are super spreaders. They could be carriers, but they never get sick. But because they're carrying the virus, they can spread it on to other people, but they never get sick. And they clear the virus a lot quicker because the virus can't replicate. It can only live for a certain period of time. As an asymptomatic person, I think it can only last maybe about 5 days, they say. For asymptomatic people, when they get infected, they're basically telling people to quarantine for 5 days. And people who are symptomatic, they're telling them to quarantine for 10 days. It used to be 14 days. I'm not sure why they have it less now. I guess because people are complaining about having to quarantine. But yeah, that's where I differ from what he's saying. He's saying that the vaccine is the firewall, basically. And no, I think your defense system is the firewall. And if something gets past your defenses, then you have your antivirus. And that would be your immune system. It has to get past your defense system in order for you to boost your immune system. I think that's what those vaccines do. They break past the firewall and go into the immune system, and then your immune system fights it off, and then your antivirus program is stronger later from building antibodies. That's what I deduced from what he was saying, and that's where I differ from what this gentleman is saying. But I'm kind of on the same page with him, but it's a little bit of a difference, and that was one of the reasons why I never took vaccines after my childhood shots. I never got flu shots every year, and I never got sick. Never got sick. Why? Because my defense system was good. I didn't need to penetrate that in order to get to my immune system to make it stronger. I had a good enough front line defense to not ever have to have it. But once I did get vaccinated, I started getting sick after that because I busted past my firewall, and that was my best defense. And now I have to depend on my immune system because my firewall is now weaker. I bypassed it, And that's what people also need to be mentioning, that part of it, is that when you get these shots, does it cause you to have an autoimmune disorder later? That's another thing people, I think, need to start asking, is that your body might at some point start to depend on having shots in order to maintain its immune system when that firewall was perfect as it was. There's a saying my mom used to say, leave well enough alone. My dad too. And if you don't do that, sometimes you can harm yourself. But it really does depend, like he said, your age. If you are older and you have a slower response, then you probably do need a better firewall. And if you don't have one, boom, you may need to boost your immune system. But when you're younger or otherwise healthy and you got a good enough firewall, don't break it, because I'm not so sure you can fix it. But yeah, that's the one thing that I hope he says it, but I don't think he will allude to that in this video. But I do agree with a lot of things he's saying because he's a smart man. But that's something that needs to be asked, is will these shots eventually cause you to have an autoimmune disorder, which means your body will start to attack itself over time. And it's like your body attacking its own self, thinking there's a virus that isn't present. So yeah, that's what I hope these shots don't lead to down the line for people. But in the meantime, it seems to be helping a lot of people out. So we'll see what happens. All right, let's continue. It was a lot of information I just kind of threw at you there, but those are things we got to think about.
Wow.
George, I have an idea for you. So a new Regeneron, when you have a slow year for business, introduce the Regeneron video game. The virus attacking video game.
That's
Crazy.
It's not bad, actually.
That's what I'm saying. Here come the antibodies. Here come the viruses. Here come the virus.
Not a bad idea.
So monoclonal means what? Because you came up with monoclonal antibodies. What does that mean?
Right. So what monoclonal means is that your body normally, in response to a vaccine, your body makes thousands and thousands of different antibodies. They're all different. Only some of them are powerful neutralizers that do stick and kill the virus. Only a small percentage of all of those antibodies. But the vaccine is good as making so many antibodies that on average, most people will make good amounts of neutralizing antibodies. What we did, and in this case, we used our special mouse, our magic mouse, to make antibodies when you can't make them in humans. Like, for example, humans don't really, it's very hard to get antibodies against Ebola in humans, so you have to do it in a mice. In the case of COVID, we used our mice to make these powerful neutralizing antibodies, but we also we took them out of some humans who had beaten the virus already. And we looked both in mice and man for the most powerful neutralizing antibodies. So we all make many, many antibodies. It's called polyclonal. Poly for many, clones for individual antibody clones. So in response to the virus, both mice and man make thousands and thousands of different antibodies. We go into the mice and men and we find the single best antibody. That's a clone of an antibody. And our cocktail is a mixture of, actually, just by accident, it could have been both from mice or both from human, but we got a spectacular antibody from a mouse, and we got another spectacular antibody from a human. And until recently, when we put them together, those two monoclonal antibodies, or a monoclonal antibody cocktail, is a mix of two monoclonal antibodies, was considered the most powerful approach for the last year and a half now to fight the virus. So it's the best.
It's the Lenny and George antibody.
The who?
Exactly.
The Lenny and George antibody.
Of mice and men.
There you go.
Oh, sorry, Lenny. Oh, sorry. Oh, John Steinbeck. Okay, excuse me. Okay.
The funny thing is, as you guys may or may not know, I think, Neil, you actually met him once, but my co-founder and the other president of Regeneron is Len Schleifer. So it is sort of like the book. It's the Lenny and George show.
He is Lenny. Gosh. So we got to take a quick break, but George, when we come back, we want to talk about Omicron and why that represents a new challenge to your entire industry.
Yep.
In terms of what methods and tools you might use to protect us. So right when we return on Star Talk. We're back, Star Talk. Yet another installment of our discussions about the coronavirus, COVID-19, and in particular, we're concerned about Omicron. And in this installment, we've got actually an old friend who happens to be president of Regeneron, Dr. George Yancopoulos. And of course, we got Chuck there. And we left off trying to distinguish between why one would get a vaccine and when one would get a monoclonal antibody treatment, which was the specialty of Regeneron. So I would get a vaccine before I'm even exposed to COVID, but I get a monoclonal antibody treatment afterwards. So why don't I get the monoclonal antibody treatment even in advance? What's the difference?
Good question.
Well, that's a great question. So the whole point of the vaccine is to make your body make antibodies to protect you against the virus. Some people aren't vaccinated, unfortunately. Or some people, even if they are vaccinated, their body hasn't made good enough antibodies. Or some people who are immunocompromised haven't made any antibodies. So some people, either because they're not vaccinated or they didn't respond well enough to the vaccine, will still get sick. For those people, we can give them the monoclonal antibody treatment. Because what that does is it's like loading them up literally with 1,000 times more antibodies than.
I got to pause that real quick. And then we're going to get back to that thought. This might be the reason why people are getting what we know as breakthroughs. They're not making enough antibodies, so they're more susceptible than other people are. Because we often wonder why you get 2 shots and get boosted and you still get sick. There's a lot of people that are still getting this after all of that. And I think he just answered the question. They're not producing the antibodies. They are immunocompromised and they didn't even know it. So I'm going to go back just a few steps here, so we don't miss anything he has to say, because I think he's going to say something else that's important too. I don't know what that is. Here we go.
What's the difference?
Here we go.
Well, that's a great question. So the whole point of the vaccine is to make your body make antibodies to protect you against the virus. Some people aren't vaccinated, unfortunately. Or some people, even if they are vaccinated, their body hasn't made good enough antibodies. Or some people who are immunocompromised haven't made any antibodies. So some people, either because they're not vaccinated or they didn't respond well enough to the vaccine, will still get sick. For those people, we can give them the monoclonal antibody treatment, because what that does is it's like loading them up literally with 1,000 times more antibodies than you would make in response to a vaccine, and it helps you beat and control the virus. So what we showed, and in the highest risk people who have a high chance, somewhere on the order of 10% of having to be hospitalized or dying, these are the old elderly who suffer from an assortment of problems, that we reduce the rate of hospitalization and death by around 70 to 80%. That is huge, because it's keeping people out of the hospital and it's saving their lives. So you can use this to treat the people who are getting sick if they're at high risk, whether they got vaccinated and didn't respond or whether they never got vaccinated. So as you know, the White House just announced there were more than a couple million people dosed with this, and this has, if you do the math, it saved countless lives.
Oh yeah, you just factor into that. Yeah, it's what is it, 20,000? 200,000. 10% of 2 million is 200,000.
Yeah. And so, and if we saved 70 to 80% of those, that's a big number. Mm-hmm. We should have. Logistics have prevented us from really, we could have treated more. We should have as a society, just like we should be vaccinating more people. Mm-hmm. We should have treated more people with monoclonal antibodies. But the other, and so this is what the FDA has authorized our antibody treatment for, but also a couple other antibody treatments that are also very impressive for this purpose of taking people who are already sick and keeping them out of hospitals and keeping them from dying. And all of the monoclonal antibody treatments are very impressively effective. Ours has been sort of, up until now, the most widely used of these treatments.
It even was used by the president. Was even used by the president. It was, yes, if I remember correctly. Mm-hmm.
So the other important thing that we've shown in clinical trials, and we have applied for authorization with the FDA, and we think it's very important that they act quickly on this and allow it, is, as we all know now, and there's been, stories on 60 Minutes and CNN and so forth, okay, that despite vaccination, the immunocompromised are not protected. If anything, they get a false sense of security. Wow. What does immunocompromised mean? Is you're not making antibodies to a disease, but also to a vaccine. So those people are unprotected, even if they've been boosted twice. It doesn't matter. Your body is not making antibodies. You get no protection from the vaccine. Unfortunately, there's 5 to 10 million Americans like that. And so what we've shown is that for people who don't have their own antibodies, we can protect you. We can do exactly what you said, Neil. We can give you the antibody beforehand. In fact, we can give it to you maybe twice a year or 4 times a year. And now the antibodies last in your body for months, and they keep you protected. You're as good, if not better protected than a vaccinated person. So for the people, the small percentage, I mean, you'd want to, because it's much harder to make monoclonal antibodies than it is to make a vaccine. So you want to vaccinate as many people as you can, but there will always be that 5 to 10 million Americans, about 5% of the population, 3 to 5% of the population, that will just not respond to the vaccine. For them, they are true prisoners of the pandemic, because they can't go out and resume their lives. If and many of them, these are people who've had lymphoma or multiple sclerosis or other these diseases, other cancers that are keeping their immune system down. Many of them know it. They're very sophisticated, medically speaking. They know that they're not protected, and so they're trapped. Okay, so for these people, we have applied for the FDA for authorization that we could give ours as what's called a passive vaccine. You made a joke about a horse before. Unbelievable. The first Nobel Prize was awarded in 1896 because some genius guy, von Behring, realized that if you took a horse that was immune to diphtheria or to tetanus, you could take out the horse serum and you could inject it into humans, and now the humans would be protected from what were at that time scourges and epidemics of diphtheria and tetanus and so forth. What was in the horse serum? It was antibodies. So this was called for years, for over a century now, it's been called a passive vaccination. It protects people who can't or don't have their own antibodies. So there's 2 purposes of monoclonal antibodies. to treat those who are already infected, load them up with monoclonal antibodies, which will bind, kill the virus, and help cure them, keep 70 to 80% out of the hospital and from dying. Or, and that's authorized, that's FDA authorized. And what we've applied more recently for is to protect the immunocompromised, who are the small percentage of people who can't respond to a vaccine. This is why we need all of these. We need the vaccines, but we need these monoclonal antibodies.
Okay.
And I got something to say about that one. That's amazing that we even have that kind of technology where we can help other people with those with the cells of people that are cured of it, or even animals for that matter. I'm surprised they even bond with our system. Wow, that was some pretty powerful stuff. I'm wondering though, if people who have what's called long haulers disease, I don't know if he'll allude to this, I really hope so, but there's some people who've not cured, but they've cleared the virus. I think it only has like a 10 or 15 day incubation period before you test negative. But some people, once they've cleared the virus, they still have the symptoms, and these are long haulers. And I know one specifically. He's had this cough for like almost 2 years now. And the problem is like, I wonder if those monoclonal antibodies will actually repair damaged cells, because some people actually have damage from COVID-19 that it'll never be the same again with them. They just couldn't, for whatever reason, they didn't build up the antibodies to be able to fight the disease, and they're just still dealing with it, even though the virus it's run its course already. They're still dealing with the symptoms, and I don't know if the antibodies will actually help with the symptoms as opposed to just clearing the virus. That's something I hope that he brings up. If he doesn't, that's okay. I might have to reach out to this guy, because I would like to pick his brain. He is super smart. Let's get into this. I'm going to go back a couple of, I'm going to get it. No, actually, you know what? I'm going to keep going. Here you go.
Okay, so now you spoke earlier.
Hey, it's Ryan Reynolds. As owner of Mint Mobile, my goal is
commercial.
to save our money so we can save you money. So, by using...
Skip ads.
Earlier about the spike protein that gets targeted. So tell me about Omicron. If somehow it is our current arsenal is not as effective against it, is it because Omicron, a variant of COVID-19, does not have a spike protein?
Yeah, spike is a great word. It's a great word for these structures that are on the surface of the virus. And they literally, what is the spike? It's what digs into the human cell and allows the virus to burrow into the human cell. It's literally like a spike that the virus uses to burrow into the human cell.
Wow.
And fertilize itself and make many plant itself and make many copies. And what
Thank you.
antibodies do is they literally cover the spike. And so the spike can't dig into the human cell. That's exactly what antibodies do, and that's exactly what the spike does. And what vaccines do is they make the body make antibodies that cover the spike. And what we did is we just picked the best of these antibodies out of mice and man to make a cocktail to cover the spike and keep it from allowing the virus to dig into the human cells.
Okay, what's the difference? Okay. So what's the difference between that and Omicron?
Omicron. Okay, the spike of Omicron has mutated. This is what we always fear, whether it's cancer or whether it's infectious disease, that we've come up with some cure and so forth, but the cancer or the virus is so smart in terms of the principles of evolution that it just selects for itself to mutate so that the antibody sticking to the spike where it's stuck mutated away, so our antibodies, or so that antibodies in general, whether they're from vaccines or from monoclonal antibodies, might not stick as well. That's the big fear. Is we have rarely seen, certainly not in the history of COVID, but rarely seen with viruses, that you get such a seismic shift in terms of the number of mutations. Delta was 1 or 2 mutations. Beta was 1 or 2 mutations. Omicron is 32 mutations in the spike protein. It completely changes the spike protein. And what that has done is it's terrified everybody that possibly the antibodies that we used to get from vaccines to stick to the spike, or the antibodies that we've selected out of mice and man to give to patients will no longer stick as well to the spike. It won't cover it up, and now the spike will be able to dig into the human cells.
Holy Max.
So,
Wow.
32 mutations. It's just scary.
That's insane.
Well,
That
so
sounds
the viruses
super,
are
super dangerous.
So Chuck, the viruses are even smarter than that because
Go ahead.
Here we go. They invented humans and had humans invent airplanes so that the viruses can go transcontinental.
Nice.
I hear that they're so smart that they're now getting us to invent spaceships.
Right.
We can carry the viruses to other planets
To
as well.
Mars.
First they got us to invent Amazon so that we could invent the spaceships to take them to other planets. I was going to say, number one, the Omicron sounds super dangerous, and that you should maybe take action if you haven't taken action for yourself personally, or is it that it's such a change that it won't make a difference is what I hear people saying?
No, I mean, I unfortunately, we don't know. People are scared now.
But you don't know yet.
And
You don't know yet.
Yeah, there's reason to be scared, but we don't know the full impact of this at this point. There's reason to have hope, and certainly, just like the biopharma industry, fought back, against the original virus, many of us have been anticipating this potential challenge, and that this challenge would go on and on. So many of us are trying to be prepared for the worst case scenario. So there's reason that Omicron could be a real challenge. It may diminish vaccine immunity. It may diminish the natural immunity that people get who have been naturally infected and made their own antibodies. And it might diminish many of the monoclonal antibody treatments. Many of us in the industry have been afraid that this might be the case.
Wow.
And you have probably heard from, the vaccine makers, such as the Pfizers and the BioNTechs and the Modernas, that they're already planning on coming up with potential Omicron vaccines if we need them. If we're losing so much immunity from the original vaccines that within a few months, they'll be able to have a new version of the vaccine that will hopefully protect us against Omicron. In the same way, like I said, there's a few major companies like us, like AstraZeneca, and others who have made monoclonal antibodies, and we have certainly been planning for this contingency. So we already have thousands of backup antibodies, which we're testing. So we don't know yet for sure, though we're worried, whether our current cocktail is going to lose a lot of activity, but we are worried that it is. But we're prepared in that we've already even put into clinical trials new antibodies that we think will be able to still be effective even in the face of Omicron. So unfortunately, many of us think that this is going to be a long game, a long challenge. The virus is going to have peaks and valleys, and it's going to go down in its prevalence, and we're going to feel pretty good for a while. And then a new variant might come along and it might scare us.
Why is it any different from the mutations of the seasonal flu? Where each year, flu changed a little bit. Let's find another vaccine for it. And everybody gets vaccine. Every flu people get flu shots every year. So why wouldn't there be a COVID shot every year, for example?
It may be exactly the same thing. The only difference, and the reason why the flu generally has not shut down society and COVID has shut down society, and why that solution, which is, I think, maybe where we're ultimately coming to, exactly what you just described, is that we're going to still have to do something to protect as many people as possible, more so than the flu, because the rate of serious disease is higher than it is for flu. So flu in general, most flus don't have a 10% hospitalization and death rate among the high-risk population. So what does that mean? Yes, we will want to have regular vaccines, okay? And in addition, we will also need, because, with the flu vaccine and so forth, somebody does get the flu, we tolerate the fact that some people rarely get really sick, and we don't necessarily treat everybody who has the flu. Though many of us now think that it's a worthwhile thing to do. So we are actually developing flu monoclonal antibodies. So if people get the flu, and particularly if they're older and so forth, we want to protect those people, even if their chance of hospitalization and death may only be 1%. But with COVID, if it's like 10%, that's why there's so much concern. So despite vaccines, if the future state is exactly how you describe it, people will be getting sick. So we will be needing treatments, whether the treatments are combinations of monoclonal antibodies or now some of these oral pills that people are talking about. We will also, because of the high rate of potential hospitalization and death, we will also continue to need an alternative to the vaccine for the 5 to 10 million Americans who will not respond to any vaccine, the immunocompromised people. So you're absolutely right. And I see it sort of the same way. This is a long haul. It's going to be a constant challenge. It's going to be, back in high school, I remember my English teacher, Mrs. Zelaznik, she taught us about man against machine, man against man, man against nature, man against virus. This is humanity against the virus. This may be going on against this virus for a while. We're going to have to constantly update our vaccines. We're going to have to constantly update our monoclonal antibody treatments. And we're going to probably have to constantly update oral pills as they come on. Why? Because the virus is smart. It's going to mutate. It's going to get on spaceships. It's going to go crazy.
So okay, with that, here's what I got to ask. Neil, who did you have for English?
Miss McGillicuddy. No, I don't know.
Oh, no, you didn't.
Just a last thing before we take a break, and we're going to come back and get questions from our fan base, our supporters on Patreon, who were alerted that you'd be on the show, George. So we look forward to hearing those. Chuck has them collated over there. Just a quick point. If Omicron does rise up, the fact that we've all been vaccinated, it won't protect us necessarily from Omicron, but it will continue to protect us from the original virus. Isn't that correct? It wasn't a waste of effort. It's not like the whole virus everywhere mutated. It's that one strain of it mutated. Now they're both out there. Isn't that a fair way to say it?
Yep.
That is a fair way to say it. So, for example, right now, our monoclonal antibody treatment is fully effective against every single other variant of concern that has arisen. Those will continue to circulate. And right now, Omicron is not really present at high levels. So people obviously should be continuing getting vaccinated. And if they get sick, they should be continuing to get monoclonal antibody treatments. If Omicron yields a huge surge, then unfortunately, all of those people, we don't know yet. We don't know the data. I'm not saying it will be the case, but the concern is that many of them will not be protected sufficiently from the vaccines and maybe not even from some of these monoclonal antibodies.
Got it. Well, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to go into a Cosmic Queries mode for this episode to get questions from you guys out there for our special guest today, old friend of mine, George Yancopoulos. We'll be right back.
This is a very good show. I'm about to watch it again so I can absorb some more information. But basically, from what I gathered, the vaccines do their job, but some people are they just don't, it doesn't work for some people. And that would make sense, seeing why everybody is, actually, it would make sense that a lot of people are hospitalized because I'm wondering now if they're immunocompromised because they took the shot earlier and it weakened their immune system when they already had a good defense system, or is it that they just cannot make enough antibodies? That's really hard that's a gray area for you, isn't it? That's a good thing to research. But I'm glad I checked out this show. Looks like they're going to go into questions and answers. But if you want to look at this video, you should. You could actually view it again without my commentary on what is it called? Star Talk with Niel Degrasse Tyson, the guy you see right here in front of the screen. I've seen him on a lot of shows in regards to space exploration, and he talks about things like that. And cosmic type of, things. He's almost like Bill Nye the Science Guy. It's like a black version of him. But it's amazing. This guy is super smart. And you know what? I didn't know who that the other gentleman was, the CEO of Generon, until I watched this show. Now I have a lot more respect for him because he actually was able to explain it in plain, simple English for everyone to understand. And I think that everyone should try to watch that video again if they can. If you wanted, maybe point people out to the original video, that would be good too. Because, I mean, there's some information in there a lot of people need to know about. They don't know. They have no idea. I wish he had talked a little bit more about people who have allergies, and if people who have allergies could have monoclonal antibodies, because I'm sure that there may be whatever the binder they use for the monoclonal antibodies. Hopefully, it's not polyurethane. A lot of people are allergic to that. I know they use that for vaccines, especially vector vaccines, and this one isn't. This is an mRNA, but they may actually still be using polyurethane in it. But that's something that I wish they had talked more about, allergies, and if people who have allergies can have that monoclonal antibody treatment. But I mean, that's something I can look up and research. But there's more questions than answers out there. It really is, because it seems like the more information we get, the more information changes. It's like in the beginning, it was like, we didn't have to wear a mask yet. I think, and then you have to wear one mask, then two masks, then vaccinated don't have to wear a mask and the unvaccinated do. The information just keeps changing so much, and any wrong turn can cause this pandemic to explode. And I think that a lot of mistakes were made in the first half of the year, and then the first half of the pandemic. I think the most mistakes were made then. I think we're learning a lot more about how this virus behaves, what it wants, and I think that a lot of people's behavior needs to change, because we're feeding this virus with the behavior. That's what's happening. A lot of people don't want to follow the protocols. They just think that their rights and freedoms are more important than safety, I guess. Or they maybe feel like the safety is overboard. They think that we're doing too much. But you really can't do too much, even if there's a few people at risk. You got to protect everybody. But I think that if meeting somewhere in the middle, you can still be able to be free to a certain extent, that it doesn't tread on other people's safety. No one treads on your freedom, and then no one treads on your safety. And the reason why we don't have unity in this country, I think, is because the federal government is not on board with the state. Federal government has rights, constitutional rights that you can't tread on. And then the state is saying, well, we have to tread on some of it in order to get this virus under control. So basically, it's kind of a coin toss is what it is. You got the right fighting the left when we all want the same thing. It makes no sense. I think that people have to have a meeting of the minds and not a meeting of the weapons. Seriously, a meeting of the minds. They have to be able to understand each other and protect one another. I think it all comes from understanding and, trying to, really get what you want out there, and then listen to other people as well, But a lot of people don't want to do that these days. Just look at some of these posts online. People are arguing, this pandemic has become politicized, and that should never happen. It's just not political. That virus don't care about left or right wing. It's going to get everybody. So we have to band together so that we can beat this thing, or at least adapt to where it doesn't change the way that we want to live. So I really appreciate you guys watching this video. It's gone on for quite a bit, but it's just a huge discussion that we all need to have with ourselves and with our families and our children too. Don't leave them out. Talk to your kids about what's going on, and you can tell them in a way that it doesn't frighten them. You know what I mean? The one thing that we have to encourage each other to do is not to be afraid, because there's a lot of fear mongering going on. Don't be afraid of anything. Just face your obstacles as they come. Don't be afraid, and I think that's what's driving a lot of these arguments is fear and misinformation sometimes. But that's only because we just need to know more. We need to learn more. If our biggest, brightest minds in science don't know everything, what makes you think you're going to know everything, right? So just try to relax and learn as much as you can. And I try to tell my friends and family that, don't let this virus dominate your life. And that was the one thing that I took away from what our previous president said, that our current president should have been saying. Don't let this virus dominate your life. That resonated with me when Trump said that. I wish Biden would say the same thing, because then he would instill confidence in people. that, yes, we're going through a tough time, but don't let it dominate your life. That was so powerful when he said that. It meant a lot. Don't let it dominate you. All right. That's pretty much it for now, you guys. Thank you guys for watching my video. And have a great evening, morning, or afternoon. Doodles.